You know, when we think of India's Gupta Empire, we think of this incredible golden age, right? A time of amazing science, stunning art, just a flourishing culture. But the way it all ended? Yeah, that was anything but golden. It's kind of like a rule of history, isn't it? All great empires fall. I mean, it doesn't matter how big they are, how advanced, or how powerful, sooner or later, they all come to an end. And the Guptas? Well, they were no exception.
So that's the big question, right? What exactly brought this legendary empire to its knees? Was it some single dramatic event, or was it more like a slow burn, a decay from the inside out? Well, today we're going to dig in and unravel the story of how one of history's greatest civilizations came undone.
Okay, so let's get into it. The first piece of the puzzle, the first domino to fall, really, was an attack from the outside. You could see the first major crack in the empire's armor came from this new and frankly relentless enemy.
Yeah, we're talking about the Huns. Now, to be fair, in the early 5th century, the Gupta emperor at the time, Skandagupta, an absolute legend, he actually managed to push them back, and it was a huge victory. But the thing about the Huns, they just didn't give up. They came back later that century, and this time, well, the emperors weren't as strong. The Huns started breaking through, conquering huge chunks of western India, and by 515, their leader, a guy named Toramana, had carved out a massive piece of central India for himself.
And you'd think that's bad, right? Well, it gets worse. Taramana's son, Mihirakula, took over. And let me tell you, this guy had a reputation. He wasn't just there to conquer, he was there to destroy.
And we know this because we actually have accounts from people who were around at the time. There was this famous Chinese traveler, Huna, who wrote about him. He called Mihirakula a fierce persecutor of Buddhists, just known for his incredible cruelty. So you see, this wasn't just a simple invasion for territory. It was a full-blown campaign of terror.
But here's where the story takes a really interesting turn. So, Mihirakula is eventually defeated. But guess who does it? It's not the Gupta emperor. Nope. It's a local ruler, a man named Yashodharman of Malwa. And that should make you stop and think, right? Where was the emperor in all this? Why wasn't the central authority, the main government, stepping in to deal with this massive threat?
And that very question brings us to the next big problem. Because while the Guptas were dealing with this huge threat from the outside, the empire was literally being ripped apart from the inside. So to understand this, we need to talk about these guys called feudatories. It's a fancy word, but you can basically think of them as regional governors or maybe subordinate kings. Their whole job was to run a part of the empire for the emperor. But, and this is a big but, as the emperor started to look weaker, these local guys started to get, well, ambitious.
And remember Yashodharman, the guy who beat the Huns? Well, he's the perfect example. After his big victory, he didn't just go back to being a loyal governor. Oh no. He openly challenged the Guptas. He even put up his own pillars of victory, which was a huge slap in the face to the emperor. And his defiance, it was like a green light for everyone else. All these other local leaders in places like Bihar, Bengal, Gujarat, they all saw their opening and started declaring independence. The whole empire was just shattering into pieces.
And you know what's wild? We can actually see this happening in the archaeological record. After that strong emperor, Skandagupta, was gone, poof! Official Gupta coins, official inscriptions, the stuff that says, "with the empire is in charge here," they just vanish from these really important western regions. It's like concrete, physical proof that the emperor's power there was completely gone.
Okay, so let's recap. We've got attacks from the outside, and we've got the empire breaking up from the inside. It's a total mess. But it makes you wonder, what was the root cause? What made the whole foundation so weak that it could even get to this point?
Well, as is so often the case in history, you've got to follow the money. Or, in this case, the lack of it. All these political problems were really just symptoms of a much, much deeper economic sickness.
And when you dig into the historical texts from the period, they spell it out pretty clearly. The empire was suffering from a slow, creeping, but ultimately fatal economic decline that left it totally vulnerable.
There are two really big red flags that tell us what was going on. First, their money. The famous gold coins of the Guptas? Well, over time, they started having less and less actual gold in them. That's a classic sign that the government is broke. And second, look at how they paid people. They stopped paying their officials and even their priests with cash. Instead, they started giving them huge chunks of land.
Now, this whole paying with land thing, it was a disaster. It was totally a self-inflicted wound that kicked off this awful downward spiral. Think about it. The emperor gives away land.
That means he also gives away the tax money from that land, so the central government gets less and less revenue, which makes it weaker. But the local lords who get the land, they get richer and more powerful. So the empire's economic policy was literally bankrolling the rebellion of its own governors. It's unbelievable.
So when you put it all together, you see it wasn't just one thing that brought down the Guptas. It was the absolute perfect storm. You had the Hun invasions draining their resources, their money, their soldiers. You had the internal fractures, with these local lords breaking away and shattering the empire's unity. And holding it all up, or rather, letting it all collapse, was this rotting economic foundation. The whole system was just too weak to fight back or even command loyalty. Each problem just fed into the next.
You know, the Gupta Empire fell something like 1,500 years ago. But this pattern, it feels timeless, doesn't it? Which leaves us with one last thing to think about. How many times in history have we seen this exact same playbook? External pressure, internal division, and economic trouble, all coming together to bring down a great power. It makes you wonder, does it still happen today?